Thank you so much for joining us. Could you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Victor Rios. I'm a professor of sociology at UC Santa Barbara.
Awesome. So you're also the author of, an upcoming book called "Let's Be Real Man," which really addresses, toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity. What inspired you to author this book? What was the intent of the book, and who is the audience you're trying to address?
I've been wanting to write about issues of manhood and masculinity for a long time, and in my other books, I've written about it, but just um, a chapter at a time. So, like, I have a couple books I wrote on young people that get in trouble with the law, on juvenile justice, and I talk a lot about how the system itself actually perpetuates toxic masculinity, and I give examples of that,
Mhm.
uh, like when young men in particular run into police officers. Sometimes the conversations can be very terse, very rough, very aggressive, and then it turns into this almost like manhood challenge between the two. And so I wrote about that early on, in my first books. And then after a while, I thought like it might be good to write for a general audience. Like, what does it mean to be um, raised as a man in the United States? How does that affect um, those around us? And then when is it that we behave in negative ways towards others based on our, you know, understanding of manhood without
Mhm.
even knowing it sometimes? I also had a former student that really experienced big trauma where there was a mass shooting at UC Santa Barbara, and he ends up being almost being a victim. He was there, he witnessed it, and him and I had a discussion about how do we bring a conversation about the connection between violence and manhood in our society
Mhm.
to other young men in particular, so that we start to reflect about these issues of manhood and how they affect others, particularly women in our society.
I know you touched on it a little bit in that explanation, a couple of examples, and also, the socialization part of manhood. Um, but what is like toxic masculinity? What kind of impacts does it have on the self, the community, and, including women, like you're talking about? And how does toxic masculinity contribute to a culture of sexual violence and harassment?
Yeah, so toxic masculinity as a definition to me is any kind of act or behavior that men partake in that has a negative effect on others, and it could be based on our understanding of gender. So
Mhm.
I'll break that down. Sometimes, if we call another guy the B word, we're belittling him, but we're belittling him with this background of particularly a word that's mainly used for women to put them down in our society. And so if you deconstruct that further back, you start to see that we place women in a lower kind of power position in our society. And that's why we, as men, sometimes feel like we could put down other men as if they were women. In this case, the understanding of the B word being that not only is this other man acting um, less than a man, but he's acting like a woman, right? And so other words that connect to that are like, or phrases are when men are told not to be, pussies, or when they're told um, not to be sissies, or not to be act like little girls. So all of these charged words that really make us assume that women are less than us, and that's why we shouldn't be acting like them. And that's where that comes from. So toxic masculinity has to do with bringing the source of women as less than as part of
Mhm.
our identity. We define ourselves based on what we are not, and so therefore we're defining ourselves based on not being women, and instead we should be defining ourselves based on being, say, positive men, based on being compassionate, being empathetic, helping others, and breaking down um, sort of these violent ways of acting sometimes in our society that again ends up impacting women in particular.
Focusing a little bit more on positive manhood and positive attitudes. What is healthy masculinity, and how do we practice it?
Yeah. I think for me, healthy masculinity is constantly reflecting on how we're acting towards others. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's step one, like thinking about the words we say, the space we take up. There's this whole phrase of man spreading. And man spreading is essentially a guy taking over in a public space a little bit more than others, in particular, again, women, because of the very virtue of being a man. And we are kind of taught to take space. You see me talking right now, I'm using my arms a lot. If I were talking to others in a social space, I might be, kind of man spreading
Spreading.
things. In many ways, men are taught, they grow up, they're socialized, not even knowing it, they're to take up a little bit more space than maybe they should be, to be inconsiderate in a benign way, meaning like we don't even realize it. And we're actually being nice, even thinking we're taking up space because we're being nice. But in reality, what we're doing is we're not allowing others to have space. Just reflecting on our behavior as men.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, how is it that I'm taking up space? How is it that I'm not being considerate of others? Healthy masculinity is constantly, number one, reflecting on our behavior as men that might be affecting others, even in small negative ways, but it's
Uh-huh.
still negative. And then the second piece is to take care of ourselves as men. Like, how do we practice a self care as men that allows us to be psychologically taken care of? So does that mean speaking to a therapist? Does that mean um, finding creative ways to tell others about our experiences? Sometimes as men, we get taught, you be tough, you hold it in, you don't talk about your issues. But in reality, we should be sharing with others our vulnerabilities. So that's number two, as men being willing to share our vulnerabilities with others, because the more healthier we are psychologically, the more likely we are to treat others in positive ways. And then number three, in terms of healthy masculinity, is really trying to create efforts and energies and practices that teach other men not to behave negative towards women, that confront other men when they are talking negative or being negative towards women. So being an active bystander, being there, seeing someone say something negative about a woman and saying in a, it could be in a very polite way, but oh, that's not how I talk about women, or that's not the way we should be talking about women. Or even a worse experience of seeing a man taking advantage of a woman, um, and being willing and able to confront that situation. We think of like college parties, for example, that there should be squads of young men out there looking out for other men that might not be behaving appropriately and approaching them, right, and just saying this is not how we behave towards women. Just so finding creative ways and strategies for confronting the negative treatment of by other men is an important component of this healthy masculinity.
One of the things that I really admired is that you were very intentional about bringing in, as many people as possible to review your book, including, women, the LGBTQ community, etc. And a lot of the times, these efforts seem to be very divided. Men speak to men about men's issues, women speak to women about women's issues, um, and so on. But we rarely see, or at least not as often, do we see like thoughtful collaboration. The process that I personally found to be very enlightening. And so I'm wondering, how do you think this collaborative effort contributed to the composition of the book? And why was it important for you to bring in these different perspectives?
Even though early on I said this book has to be a conversation by men for men, there's an important piece that's been missing out there, that many times men don't really talk about these issues with men.
Mhm.
And so I thought early on, I'm going to leave some people out, but it's important to talk about these issues with men and young men in particular. I thought a lot about what the amazing Black feminist writer and poet Audre Lorde said. She said, um, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle
Mm.
because we do not live single issue lives. And I thought about it like, okay, in this moment, this is an issue of men and the way in which women are being treated by men, but it's deeper than that. It's an issue that all of us kind of feel the consequences of.
Mm.
We go to this mass shooting idea. We're affected by mass shootings. And mass shootings, if you look at the root cause of many mass shootings, it is this kind of injured masculinity, these men that have a sense of injured masculinity, or if you think about it too, the way I define healthy masculinity, never were taught or knew how to practice healthy masculinity or refuse to practice healthy masculinity. Solving problems with violence, not a healthy masculinity. And I grew up surrounded by violence, experiencing violence, being a victim of violence. And so I ran away from that. I didn't want to be in a violent environment, and I didn't want to be violent towards others because I saw the repercussions it had on me and my family and my community. So to think about ways in which we kind of bring together a coalition of folks that have been impacted by toxic masculinity, and that's all of us, right? Some of us that have practiced it in the past or continue to practice it and have to check ourselves or be checked by others. I've been married for 20 years, and my wife Rebecca will be the first to tell you, hey, Victor's got a lot of work to do, and she tells me, you got a lot of work to do. And I have to be willing to listen to that and then ask, where do you think I need to adjust? What do I need to fix? And sometimes she finds herself telling me, look, you need to take up less space. It's exactly what I'm preaching. Like, oh, men need to take up less space. And my wife's over here telling me, you need to take up less space. So like, oh, I'm sorry. And then just pull back and find a way to give more space to others. So thinking of ways in which we all come together as a community to create a narrative that then others can listen to and can have conversations with. In the case of the book, I'm just so grateful that SASA members were willing to participate, were willing to give me critical feedback and edits, and were willing to be actively um, engaged with the work and even developing a curriculum for them to teach then other men, or to teach men how to teach other men about some of the understandings in this book, and about, of course, what the incredible work that SASA does, and that's to really bring awareness to sexual assault, sexual violence culture. And so it's crucial that I'm not the only one putting out the word out there about toxic masculinity or about healthy masculinity. I'm just one person from one angle, and then other people from other angles can also put out the word. The only way to do that is to collaborate in a diverse as a way as possible.
For us, participating in that and addressing toxic masculinity is, a core of one of the issues that we're constantly advocating against. And so, for us, it was like an honor to be able to read the manuscript and to work with you on addressing this issue. And, you brought up the seminar and the Healthy Masculinity Initiative. And I know you've been working very closely both with CIAVASH and, SASA members to develop this Healthy Masculinity Initiative, which is, a seminar containing 2 modules based on Let's Be Real Man. Why develop a more interactive approach to the book?
An interactive approach is crucial, especially in this time. Right now in this interview, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're all sequestered at home. We're all isolating. And so I think it's important for us to find many avenues to get the word out. One way is through a book, another way is through a curriculum, another way is through social media posts, another way is through videos. And so it's just crucial to get the word out in as many ways as possible. And collaboration with students was really about getting um, getting students that would take their own understanding of toxic masculinity and then sexual assault, sexual violence culture, and um, teaching others about how to make it better. And this is
Mhm.
in many instances, it was the members of SASA, who are very diverse, young women, young men, individuals that are from the LGBTQ plus community, you know, that were really uh, giving enlightenment and insight to how to teach men or those identifying themselves as men uh,
Mhm.
about toxic masculinity. So it was beautiful to see because on a weekly basis we would get together, but it was really their insight. It was really how are you going to teach your peers about teaching others? And so it became a train the trainer model where the SASA members would sit down, develop a curriculum, and then eventually they will train young men, particularly step one would be from fraternities,
Mhm.
and go and train their peers in the fraternities so that it becomes kind of a model where men become sort of take ownership of
Right.
training other men. And then the way that you kind of make sure it's working is that you develop an assessment. You make it evidence based. So you see where men are at when they start the training by giving them a pre-survey, and then you see where they're at after they take the training by giving them a post-survey. So working on all of this on
Mhm.
multiple levels through the research, through the training, through the SASA members, bringing fraternity members that are already ready to take the training, and then having them go train others. And I think that's how you change the culture, right? You get enough people thinking about this kind of issue, and you have them trained in it, and then they go out and they train others, and those people train others, and before you know it, it's a conversation the entire community is having.
Right. And it kind of goes back to like what you're talking about in terms of, accountability and bystander intervention and that those kind of practices. And the more people that you put, um, and, more men that we put into this kind of like, responsibility role, the more we might see that kind of intervention that could, prevent toxic masculine behaviors. So I think that's really, really cool and really important to have such like an interactive approach. And then in general, how has working with students inspired and developed your work? I know that you work with students across a lot of different sectors, not just like right here, but overall, how has students inspired your work?
Oh, students keep me on my toes. You know, students keep me anew. Students keep me rolling. You know, like students put me in check. You know, keep me in line. Every year, every kind of few years, um, some incredible new group of students show up, and they're like, "Look, this um, what the issue is. This is how we address the issue." Students always bring incredible insight to what I'm doing. So, like for example, 5 years ago, I wasn't talking about sexual assault, sexual violence culture, right? I was just talking about sexual assault or sexual violence, and I wasn't talking about it as a culture. I wasn't thinking about it in that way. And my students, someone like you, Emily, and others, were like, look, this is a culture that, oh yeah, like I'm a scholar of culture, why didn't I make that connection? And it really helped me kind of level up. It really helped me
Mhm.
understand what was going on at a deeper level. So just it's important that students are always around because they're kind of the future. And they already have insight on what's going to happen in the future today, right? And they know. I learn a lot from them, just as much as I learn from other researchers.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all these questions, and I've very much enjoyed working with you over the years. And I know other SASA members have as well. You always produce really inspiring work. So I'm very excited for the release of Let's Be Real Man.
Thank you so much. Thank you, SASA, for all the important work you do. Thank you, everyone out there that's really trying to bring light to the issue of sexual assault, sexual violence. I'm just very, very touched by this movement, and I'm happy to just be having this conversation. Be blessed, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.